Hello viewer, you are welcome to this lesson. We are going to discuss primary 5 content, and from our workbooks we are beginning from page 24. That's where we are having our lesson picked from. Today we are going to be discussing the colonial agreements which were signed in Uganda. To remind you, we are looking at the colonialists. That is one of the groups of foreigners that came to Uganda. So we say that the colonialists came to rule. That's what we said in the previous lesson. Therefore, for them to rule, for them to get places or territories in Uganda, different communities in Uganda under their control, they had to employ a lot of methods. And one of them we are looking at today is they decided to make agreements with people. What I mean is they decided to agree. Those agreements are the ones that can also be called treaties. So on that page, we have got what we call the colonial agreements. We call them colonial agreements because they were signed by the colonialists and the Ugandans. It was colonialists with the Ugandans. Now, an agreement is a formal understanding. We can also call it a treaty. An understanding between two people. It can be an understanding, a mutual understanding between two people, between two companies, between two bodies, whatever. So it means that two people, for this case, come together to agree on certain terms and conditions. And we also need to note that these agreements are also called treaties. You can also call them treaties. So you will find that somewhere there we shall be having the word treaties. And that's why we are having there examples of treaties on our page. So we don't have to get confused when we see treaties. We'll be like, again, the teacher is saying agreements, but again, here is treaties. It means the same thing. Now, we are going to look at the examples of these agreements. Examples of this agreement that we have said, we can also call them treaties, which were signed between the British colonialists and the Ugandans. Now, we are going to be looking at the agreements like the 1900 Uganda Agreement, we can also call it 1900 Uganda Treaty, or someone can pronounce it as 1900 Uganda Agreement. You don't have to get a little taken up by this. Then we also have in the same year, we have an agreement signed in Toro. So we have the 1900 Toro Agreement. We shall be coming to look at these agreements one by one in detail. And then we shall have the 1901 Ankole Agreement. And then finally, we shall be having the 1933 Bunyoro Agreement. Now, I want us to note something. Bunyoro Agreement. The British decided to make, like I said at the beginning, they could make an agreement, a treaty with different communities in Uganda. Now, look at what we are having here. It means that they had to bring different territories, different societies together, slowly, one by one, till at the end of it all, they had Uganda as a country under their control. And that brought now Uganda to become a nation. Simply, we define a nation as a group of people living together in an area under one government. Now, we are going to be looking at these agreements one by one. But before we begin looking at these agreements, there is a question which I want us to understand. A question can ask us that why did the British or why did the colonialists decide to make agreements? Why did they decide to make agreements with people? Now, these people made agreements in a way that these agreements, or for the reason that these agreements are ever, like once you make something, you document it, it remains there as an evidence. Therefore, there is no way you can wake up the next day and you say, oh my Lord, what? There is something, there is a paper that you endorse, you put your signature, you signed to show that you agree. So they were making these agreements as a proof that they had power over that territory, and therefore this was now permanent and it was irreversible, meaning cannot again be reversed. Now let's look at these agreements one by one. We are beginning with the 1900 Uganda Agreement. The 1900 Uganda Agreement. Remember, I said we can also call this the 1900 Buganda Treaty. Now, we need to begin by understanding this. Why is it put here that 1900 Buganda Agreement? Why is it called 1900 Buganda Agreement? Now, we need to note that it's called the 1900 Buganda Agreement, reason being, it was signed in this year, 1900, in Buganda. Are we together? You're getting that. It was signed in 1900 in Uganda. That's why we call it the 1900. Oh, I said we can also call it the 1900 Buganda Agreement. Now, like I said, this agreement was signed between the British colonialists in Uganda, remember, and the local leaders. Now, we shall say this agreement was signed. It was signed between Britain and Uganda. Between Britain and Uganda. Again, what I want you to understand here is when we say Britain was to sign it with Uganda, we don't mean that all the British were to put signatures there. We don't mean that all the Baganda had to come and put their signatures there in that agreement. No. They had to get representatives. Therefore, for this case, we shall be having a representative or someone who represented Uganda, and then that person from Britain who was now signing it to represent the British. Now, we are going to say that Britain was represented by Sir Harry Johnson. Whereas Uganda as a kingdom. Now, there is something that we need to note here. Uganda as a kingdom was supposed to be represented by their king. I mean, their Kabaka by that time, of which the Kabaka was Kabaka Daudi Chwa. We are going to understand that this king was a very young king. He was an infant. He was a child. He was installed as a king after the death of his father, that is Kabaka Mwanga. Now, it means that at that time, this child could not sign the agreement because he was too young to sign it. Therefore, this agreement was signed by the Katikiro. The Katikiro is the prime minister that is in Uganda. So by that time, the Katikiro was Sir Apollo Kagwa. So we have now this agreement endorsed or signed by the Kabaka, by the Katikiro on behalf of the Kabaka. That is representing now the Kabaka. And remember, he was now signing to represent the Baganda. The Baganda, I mean, the Baganda as a tribe, or the Baganda people. Whereas now, Britain was represented by Sir Harry Johnston. Now, as a primary 5 child, be ready to be asked a question. Why didn't the king of Uganda at that time sign the 1900 Uganda Agreement? Who was that king? We have said the king was Kabaka Daudi. And we have said this king could not sign the agreement because he was too young to sign it. And therefore, we say this king was now given representatives, people to help him. We call that one regents. We call those people regents. Therefore, we are going to understand this by saying a regent is a person who rules on behalf of the one who is to rule. I believe we are getting that. A person who helps one to rule on his behalf or her behalf. Now, for this particular case, we are saying the regents of the Kabaka Daudi Chwa were, the first one is Sir Apollo Kagwa. Sir Apollo Kagwa. And then we shall also have the other two. We had 3 regents here. We have Sir Apollo Kagwa, Stanislas Mugwanya, and then we have Zachariah Kisingiri. So we have 3 representatives, we have 3 people who helped this king, that is to rule on his behalf. We call them regents. I believe we are getting the lesson and we are understanding this. I want you to be very attentive and you get this information because this is what will help you to sail through primary 5, sail through primary 6, and you shoot your D1 in social studies, that is in PLE. Now, coming back to our lesson, we are saying the agreement was signed between Britain as a country and Uganda as a society, as a community, or as a tribe. And we say they had to pick representatives. Uganda was to be represented by the king. Unfortunately, he could not sign. Therefore, the Katikiro had to sign Sir Apollo Kagwa. And we are saying Britain was represented by Sir Harry Johnston. Now, we are going to be looking at what were the terms of this agreement. Terms of the 1900 Uganda Agreement. Terms of the 1900 Uganda Agreement. Now, the terms of the 1900 Uganda Agreement, we are now going to look at the provisions or the things that they had to agree on. And we are going to have mainly 3 of them. The first one is we are going to have an issue on taxation, that is on tax. Then there was an issue on land. Then they had to agree on governance. We are going to get 3 issues that they discussed or that they agreed upon in that 1900 Uganda Agreement. We have this on our page 25 for us who are having our booklets. It's on page 25. But now we are going to understand well what happened. Because we have just listed them. Terms of the 1900 Uganda Agreement, taxation, land, governance. Now what happened here? Now we are going to understand that in Uganda, the people in Uganda were to pay a tax. And the tax that we are going to have here, we had mainly 2 types of taxes here, or 2 things which were taxed. One, we're now looking at taxation as a term. The first term was taxation. And we are going to say that in that agreement, there was the introduction of hat and gun tax or taxes. Gun tax, hat tax. That is what we need to know. Now, what do we mean by this? Sorry, this is supposed to be gun. What do we mean by hat and gun taxes? Here means that someone or if one owned a hat, of course we know a hat, this is a graphic house. If one had a hat, then this person had to pay some money to the British government. You have your hat, you built your hat. Remember by those days, people were not all that developed like we have big mansions today in Uganda or in Uganda. By that time, the world was still behind and people were sleeping in huts. Therefore, one who owned a hat had to pay certain amount to the British government. Secondly, one who had a gun, if one had a gun, remember when we talked about the line of these people coming to Uganda, these foreigners, we say we had the Arabs first who came before these other colonialists that we are talking about today. Therefore, we also looked at the Arabs and we say that they had brought things from their countries, from their country to Uganda. And among the things that they brought were the guns. It now means that the people of Uganda had acquired guns from the Arabs. Therefore, if one had a gun, this person had to pay certain amount to the British government. Therefore, we shall say, in the terms of the 19th of Uganda, one of them was taxation. And this tax, in this term of taxation, there was the introduction of hat and gun taxes. Before we go to understand the next task, the next term, I want to make you know that we are going to ask a question. Why did the British introduce hat and gun taxes? Why did they introduce taxation? Why did they make sure that they put that term there in that agreement? Now the answer is very simple. The British wanted to get money from people such that they could use this money to pay their administrators and then to provide some social services to the people. That's what we need to note. But we are also going to understand that it became a burden to the people in that some people could not pay this money. And we shall also be asked a question, why? The reasons are, number one, people were poor. They didn't have the money to pay. Secondly, the taxes were high. The taxes were too expensive. And then thirdly, people were negative towards paying taxes. Reason being, they could pay the taxes, but they were not provided with the relevant or with the basic social services. So people just gave up. We can't pay our taxes to them, and yet they cannot provide us with better social services. So it made people negative towards paying the tax. That is also what we need to understand as far as taxation is concerned. I believe you have got that information. It's very, very vital for you as a primary 5 child. We go to the second term. That was land. Now, what we are going to say is, second term was land. Now, what happened in this term was that the land which was in Uganda was to be divided into two. The land was to be divided into two. One, there was what we call the crown land, and then we had the Milo land. In that agreement, the land was to be shared by the two parties, by the two sides. Crown land was preserved for the British government. That is the crown land. Whereas the Milo land was reserved for the Kabaka and his chiefs. The crown land was for the British. There is something that I'm bringing out that I want you to understand here. Whereas the Milo land was to belong to the Kabaka and his chiefs. Now, if we say the Kabaka and, let me just write one and. This one was for the Kabaka and his chiefs. Therefore, it meant that land ownership was removed from the people, from the locals. Remember, before that, land belonged to everyone. Everyone had a right over his or her piece of land. I own this plot up to somewhere there. But now they are saying that the land in Uganda is no longer under the control of an individual. It is now belonging to two sides. The British side, that is the one we are calling the Crown land, and then the Milo land, which is for the Kabaka and his chiefs. Now, it made the people who had owned the land to be annoyed. They were not happy. And that is now why I was bringing it to you that we have to be very careful. Because the question can be asked, why were the land owners in Uganda not happy with the signing of this 1900 Uganda agreement? Now, they were not happy because land ownership was removed from them, as I have already explained. So we need to be aware of that. So that is what exactly happened in this term of land. Now we are going to look at the third, which is the last term of this 1900 Uganda agreement, and that is under governance. So this is going to be our number 3, term 3. I don't mean the other terms of yours of term 1, term 2, term 3, holiday, we go home. No, I'm looking at what they agreed on. What are we agreeing upon? Those are the terms of the agreement that are meaning. So the other one was governance. Now when we talk of governance, we are now looking at ruling now. To rule. Now how was Uganda ruled? Now we need to note that before then, the king had full power, full authority over his people in Uganda. Now, after the signing of the agreement, or in the signing of that agreement, they agreed that the king was now to rule his kingdom according to the way the British wanted, which means the king was now rendered as a puppet, in that he could not make his final decisions, but to wait for the final decision from the British government. So we shall simply say the king was to rule his kingdom. The king was to rule. If you are asked to explain these things, please, that is what you are going to state. The king was to rule his kingdom. Of course, we are talking about Uganda kingdom. The way he was to rule his kingdom, the way the British wanted. Or we can simply say that the way the British wished. So, I have already said this made the king to lose his powers, and the king was being used as just a puppet. He could not make his final decisions. So that was very bad, in that we shall be asked how it affected the Kabaka. How did the 1900 Uganda agreement affect the Kabaka? It affected him in a way that he could not make his final decisions. Instead, he was to rule the kingdom as the British wanted. So that is about the terms of the 1900 Uganda agreement. Still, we continue with this very term. We are going to look at the effects of this term. Of this agreement. We are going to have the effects of the 1900 Uganda agreement. That I say we can also call an agreement a treaty. I believe you are still remembering that. Now, these effects are picked from the terms. We pick them from the terms. That's why when we go to our page 26, we are having the first effect saying that there was the introduction of hat and gun taxes. That was now the outcome. Remember the effects, we are looking at what were the results. Because of the signing of this agreement, what happened? So, the first effect was, there was the introduction of hat and gun taxes. That was the first effect. Second effect. Before I mention the second effect, I'm reminding you, we have given the reasons as to why the British introduced this. I believe you still remember. They wanted to get money from these Africans, from the Ugandans. And for that we are looking at the Baganda in particular, because we are looking at Uganda Kingdom here. They wanted to get money so that they could use it to pay their workers. Second term, we are saying there was, or we shall say, the land in Uganda was divided into how many? Into two. That's what we say, into two. That is to say, we had the Milo land and the Crown land. The Milo land and the Crown land. And we say the Milo land was for the Kabaka and his chiefs, whereas the Crown land was for the British government. That is about land, and as it brings the effect. Then we are going to have another one saying that the Kabaka was given the title of His Highness instead of His Majesty, and this therefore led to the reduction of his powers. So we shall simply say that is number 3. The Kabaka of Uganda lost his powers. We can simply call that one, the Kabaka lost his powers to the British government. Remember, we have just said that the king was to rule his very kingdom the way the British wished. Therefore, he lost his powers. And then we are saying Uganda Kingdom was enlarged and divided into 20 counties. I want you to make a correction. The machine pre-typed countries, supposed to be 20 counties. So we are going to have that the Uganda Kingdom was enlarged. You can simply say Uganda as a kingdom. Uganda Kingdom was enlarged. I have said correct the word countries, make it counties on your book. That is on that page 26. I believe you have done that. So for that, we go to another agreement which was signed still in Uganda. So we are going to continue, and we are saying we are moving the second colonial agreement, which was signed in Uganda, and this was the 1900 Toro agreement. Okay, so here we are going to have the agreement signed between Britain, still with Toro as a kingdom. This time it was not again Uganda. Remember, I said the British were signing treaties or agreements with different communities in Uganda. Today they have signed with Bunyoro, with Uganda. They have finished. Now it means Uganda is under their control. Now they are going to another society, another kingdom, and we are now looking at Bunyoro, and we are saying that after signing also now with Bunyoro, it meant that Bunyoro was also under their control. They moved to another like that. So with Toro, we are saying this agreement was signed between Britain and Toro Kingdom. Now Britain was represented by Sir Harry Johnson, still Sir Harry Johnson. Sir Harry Johnson. And Toro was now represented by their king, that was Omukama Kasagama. Omukama Kasagama. Remember, Omukama Kasagama was the king, or was the Omukama of Toro. The Toro give that title to their king, that is Omukama. So the agreement was signed between Britain and represented by Sir Harry Johnson, and Toro, that is represented by Omukama Kasagama. We also have the terms of this agreement. They are the same terms as those in the 1900 Uganda agreement. They also had to introduce taxation. On that, we shall be saying that still the same thing that we said. They introduced taxation, meaning we shall have still hat and gun taxes introduced here in this agreement. And we gave the reason as to why these British were emphasizing they wanted taxation so much. We have given the reason already. And then also we shall also be able to note that the king of Toro, that is Omukama Kasagama, was to rule Toro Kingdom as the British wanted. Therefore, he also lost his powers to the British government, as he was also made to rule like a puppet, as we said for the case of Uganda Kingdom. We are going to another kingdom, that is 1901 Ankole Agreement. This one we have said we have the same terms. 1901 Ankole Agreement. Now, in this 1901 Ankole Agreement, we are going to have still the same Britain against now which kingdom? Ankole Kingdom. By then, today we no longer have an Ankole Kingdom in existence, but at that time it was there. So we have the agreement still signed between Britain and then Ankole Kingdom. Ankole Kingdom. So we are going to be looking at who were the representatives. We have Omugabe, that is for Ankole, they have the title for their kings. They had the title for their kings as Omugabe. We had Omugabe Kahaya, or King Kahaya. King, remember, is in English in a local way now, in a local, like in the culture of these people. We can call it now Omugabe. So we can say Omugabe Kahaya. And for Britain, we had Sir Frederick Jackson. Sir Frederick Jackson. The terms remain. Taxation is there still everywhere. As we have said, in every agreement, this taxation was very, very important. And also protection. They also would promote or provide protection to the kings against their against their other rivals who might be attacking them. And then we have the Bunyoro Agreement that we shall say it was signed between Sir Bernard Henry Bodlon, and then we had Omukamatito of Bunyoro, that is signing the 1933 Bunyoro Agreement. The effects are the same as we have on our page 28. We have the poll tax being introduced, taxation as we say, and then the minerals in Bunyoro, the resources were to belong to the British, or they were to be extracted or mined by the British. Remember when we were looking at why the colonialists wanted to rule Uganda, we mentioned them that one of them was that they wanted to get resources from Uganda and they take. So that is what they achieved. All the minerals that were in Bunyoro were to be belonging to the British government. And then the game reserves, which were also there, all those things were to be owned by the British. And then we are saying that Bunyoro was divided into 6 counties. Please change that countries into counties. It's supposed to be counties, not countries. It's a typing error, from the machine. And then we have Omukama agreed to cooperate with the governor. Remember, Toro was that place, it was that kingdom, Bunyoro was that kingdom that had resisted colonial rule. It had refused the colonialists to rule them. But at the end, they had to accept. Remember, when we look at the systems that the British used, we are going to be looking at mainly the British using force, and then the British using signing agreements peacefully. That is when we have indirect rule and we have direct rule. So that is about the signing of the colonial agreements that we had that were in Uganda. So, on the board, we are having the heading that is evolution of Uganda's boundaries. Now, in primary 5, we are meant to understand how Uganda as a nation was created. And we shall be able to note that Uganda did not come into existence in one day. It took time for the colonialists to bring different parts of Uganda, different communities in Uganda under their control, as we looked at in the other episode of the colonial agreements. Now, before that, we need to note that Uganda was once a very large territory. It was a very large area. And then we have some parts removed from Uganda, added to the neighboring countries, whereas some parts were brought into Uganda or added into Uganda from the neighboring countries. That is what brings what we call evolution of Uganda's boundaries. We are looking at the creation of Uganda's boundaries. How are the boundaries fixed? Sometimes we can have this heading as the fixing of Uganda's boundaries. Now, I have used two lines. I have the dotted line, which helps us to note Uganda before evolution of before the creation of the boundaries or before the fixing of the boundaries. And then there is a smooth line which shows after the fixing of Uganda's boundaries. Which means when we follow the dotted line, we shall be able to note that this is how Uganda looked like. And if we are to remove this smooth line, which shows Uganda after, we shall be able to find that Uganda was a country which looked like this. Before that, it was very large, looking like this. I believe when you look at that, it looks a little funny to you right now. But we are saying that the different parts were put into Uganda and some parts were removed from Uganda. Now we are going to look at these parts one by one. We have this part. We call it Nyanza province. Nyanza province. Now, the Nyanza province was removed from Uganda. Remember, it was part of Uganda, and now another border was put here to cut it away, meaning it was now given to Kenya. Now, why? Here we are saying the Kenyans wanted to put the railway construction under one government. By this time, we had a railway coming from Mombasa, coming to Uganda. So this was meant to put the railway under one government. And then we also have this line, this boundary fixed here to put the Maasai and the Nandi together to be governed by one government. And then we have the northeastern part. This is the northeastern part. And another border was fixed here to cut this northeastern part from this side. Now here we have the people we call the Karimojons. This is where we find the Karimojons. They are pastoral communities. They are pastoral people. And this side we have the Turkana living this way. Now there was fixing of the border here in order to separate the Karimojong from the Turkana, and this was aimed at solving the problem of cattle rustling. Cattle rustling. Cattle rustling simply means the theft of cattle, meaning that these communities could keep on attacking each other. The Karamojongs could cross to Turkana land, stealing the cattle from there. The other ones would also cross to Karamoja land to steal also the animals from there. And that is what we call cattle rustling. So to calm or to stop that problem from happening, they had to fix a border, a boundary. And then we have this land, this part, we call it the land of enclave. Land of enclave. The land of enclave. This one was cut from, it was given to Sudan from Uganda. So another was fixed, the border was fixed here to separate the Acholi from the Sudanese. That was to make resistance not to be, or to reduce on the resistance, because the Acholi and the Sudanese were too resistant to the colonial government. Therefore, they had to separate them such that at least to ease or to make them not to over-resist, not to join hands, thereby defeating the colonial government. So a border was fixed here to cut this, and this is the part we call the land of enclave. We are continuing. We have this part. This is where Uganda was passing, this River Nile. And now we have the British adding some parts. This is what we call the West Nile. West Nile. Now the West Nile region was added into Uganda, that is from Belgian Congo, that is, today we call this Democratic Republic of Congo. It was added to Uganda, and the reason here is the British wanted to have full control over the Nile. Therefore, they didn't want to share the Nile with another country, with another government. So they wanted to have full control over this Nile. So they brought the Nile in some parts to put the Nile to be part of Uganda or to be for Uganda alone here, not sharing it. So that is why that one was added into Uganda. And then we have some part here which was added from Uganda into Congo. From Uganda into Congo. This part here. And this one was added to have or to use Lake Albert as the border. And then we have some part this way which was added from Belgian Congo into Uganda. This one was also to have the British were now following the Rift Valley here as a boundary. Now for that we shall be able to answer a question which can be asked to us, that why were the British using natural boundary? Why were British using physical features as their marks, as their landmarks, as the boundaries? Why were they using physical features? And we should be able to give the answer that these physical features are permanent. That's why they were using them. For example, if we are saying we are going to add this, that we use Lake Albert as the border between Uganda and Democratic Republic of Congo, that lake is permanent. No one can remove it from there. They are saying we are going to use the Rift Valley as the border, as the boundary. You will find the Rift Valley is permanent. So we need to note that the British mainly used physical features as boundaries. The reason is physical features were permanent. Then we have this part here, which was given from, so we have this added like this, and then we have this part which was added from we call this German East Africa. By that time, today we call it Tanzania, simply. It was called by then German East Africa. So this one was added from the German government that was ruling this side, and it was given to Uganda. And for that, we shall be able to come up with the map that we have today. So let us remove some of these parts so that we shall come and we see Uganda that was created and how it looked like now. At first we say the border stretched, this was all Uganda. So we are removing this, it has been added to Kenya. So this Nyanza province is no longer in Uganda. It has been added in 1902, it's now for Kenya. Now, we have the other part, the northeastern part, that we are saying it was also added to Kenya. A border was fixed to separate the Turkan from the Karimojong, and this was to stop cattle rustling. So this part, the border was fixed, and by 1962, this part was now for Kenya. We have the Lando Enclave, which was cut to separate the Sudanese from the Acholi people. Therefore, we are going to remove also this Lando Enclave, which is no longer for Uganda. I believe we are seeing this. We are continuing. We are having this. We say the Nile, Uganda was passing here, where the Nile is, and they wanted to have full control over this Nile. So the border was extended into, and the west part was added like that. Then this part, we say this part was given to Congo, and down here was added to Uganda. And also down here, we have seen some part which was added from German East Africa. That's the one I called Tanzania. That is in 1910 into Uganda. So the border is no longer here. And finally, we now have our country, Uganda, in this shape. This is now how we have Uganda looking like. So that is about the creation of Uganda's boundaries, or how the boundaries in Uganda were fixed. We can also call that fixing of Uganda's boundaries. Now, there is something that we are going to look at. After the fixing of these boundaries, we are going to look at the effects of the fixing of these boundaries. Effects of the fixing of Uganda's boundaries. Uganda's boundaries. So we are going to understand what happened then. The first intake tells us that some people lost their historical identity, their historical origin. Some people lost their historical origin. Now, this is the first. Now, a person who was now cut from being a Ugandan is now a Kenyan, meaning that people lost their original identities or their historical background or historical origins. Then the second one is you could find that some communities, some people got separated from their relatives. Some people were separated from their relatives. Now, what I mean here is we were having Uganda extending up to the Nyanza province, all this area. Now, if for a case there have been people who are living here and some of the family members have been this side, they have been living as one country, and now because their border has been fixed here, these people are now separating. You who are this side, you are now belonging to the other government. You who have remained here, you are now the ones remaining to be Ugandans. That's why we are saying that some people were separated from their what? From their relatives. And then some tribes, due to the separation, could find that some tribes is split into two. That's why we find that we can have some tribes in this country, other tribes are in the other country of the same. So that is what exactly happened in that separation, fixation or fixing of Uganda's boundaries, that we have also called the evolution of Uganda's boundaries. For now, we want to end our lesson there, and I want to thank you so much for listening and subscribing for this lesson, accessing it. Please do continue getting more of these lessons as you keep on learning as we push on our syllabus. Thank you, and may you have a wonderful day. God bless you all. Meet you another day.